So these eviction moratoriums are supposed to expire later on this month, July 25th, I believe. You've come out with an eviction prevention toolkit. Explain that to us, please.
Well, basically, we want both people who are tenants and landlords and owners to know all the things that are available to prevent eviction. And we want to encourage them to start talking, if it comes to that, early rather than at the last minute, so that you can avail yourself of the various things that are available.
What are the various things that are or will be available, you think, Doc?
Exactly. And people need to recognize that, the government's certainly not interested in people being evicted. We're looking for every way that we can to make sure that that doesn't happen. And that includes, obviously, working with all divisions of the government to get things opened back up in a responsible way so that people can actually go back to work and open the economy.
So tell us, take us through the steps. So I'm looks like I'm not going to be able to afford my rent. We've put off the eviction until July 25th because of the policy. It expires. What's the dialogue I'm supposed to have? Let's do it from both sides. Let's take it from the person who is at risk of being evicted. But I also want to ask you, what about the other side? What about the landlord side? So let's start with the evictee.
Well, either one should go to HUD.gov/coronavirus, where you can access a lot of information. But the person who is about to be evicted obviously is the one who has the most on the line, and therefore needs to understand the whole concept of forbearance and understand what their rights are. If you're in a HUD facility, your eviction moratorium expires later than somebody who is not in a HUD-owned multifamily. And maybe some people don't know that. So this really kind of lays all of that out, but also provides you with information that you can give to your landlord or to the owner, because sometimes they're not aware of the forbearance that's extended to them and the fact that they, as a small business, are eligible for some PPP benefits.
Interesting, yeah. Let's talk about some of the other things that are bubbling up right now. COVID-19 cases continue to rise. Deaths are down, though. Doc, what do you see? You're a neurologist. You're a well-trained doctor. What are you seeing out there?
Well, it's very encouraging, in fact, that the death rate has gone down so much. One death is a lot, particularly if it's you. But the fact of the matter is, we're in the 300 or 400 range a day now versus 2,500 range a couple of months ago. So that means we've learned a lot about how to deal with this. It also means that many of the people who are being infected are young people. And, even though we talk about these vastly increased numbers, you never hear anybody talking about which ones are symptomatic and which ones are not. The fact of the matter is, a lot of them are asymptomatic. And obviously, if you go out into a population and you start testing a lot of people, and many of them are asymptomatic, your numbers are going to increase quite dramatically. And we're seeing a combination of that. And the fact that I think a lot of young people are not really taking this seriously in terms of the mechanisms of spreading of disease. So, they're not socially distancing, they're not washing their hands, they're not wearing masks, and they're thinking that they're pretty invulnerable anyway. The fact of the matter is they are.
Yeah.
They're not likely to die from it, but they can pass it on to someone else. And I always suggest to people, just assume that you're an asymptomatic carrier when you're around elderly people and susceptible people. Just make that assumption and act in that.
Yeah, it's hard to keep young people down for this amount of time, especially when, as you point out, it's almost unlikely for them to die from a case. They'll get a flu, they'll get some symptoms, they'll move on, and that's really why we see these big parties going on in various pools and lakes around the country. Doc, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you this with what's going on with our statues and with the racial tensions in America. Do you believe there is systemic racism in America?
I believe there was a time when there used to be systemic racism. I certainly grew up during such a time. America has changed dramatically since that time, and I don't think that it exists now. There is racism, but there's a difference between systemic racism and racism. And
can you take us through that?
Yeah, well, if you're talking about just the existence of racism, that's individuals that populate all over the place. If you're talking systemic, you mean that it's throughout the fabric of everything we do, which means we need to be changed. And it provides a mechanism for those who want to fundamentally change America to say, you see, it's a totally broken system, and therefore we need to replace it. And that simply is not what's going on. I think there are a lot of people who are utilizing race and racism as an excuse to push their ideology upon the rest of society. And it's a double-edged sword because they can also make a lot of people feel guilty. And guilty people frequently do things that don't make a lot of sense. So this is what we're seeing right now. People taking down statues, renaming universities. I mean, where does that stop? It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever to try to obliterate your history. But here's what you must remember. If you want to fundamentally change a society, first you have to obliterate your history, because your history is what gives you your identity. And if you don't have an identity, then you don't stand for something. And if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. And that's basically what we see happening in our society today.
Yeah, and there was a Spanish-American philosopher who said those who do not know history are going to doom themselves to repeating it. We're going to say thank you to Dr. Ben Carson for your time. Again, HUD Secretary, neurosurgeon, all around just great guy. Thank you, Dr. Carson.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Eric.